Well, what an exciting day so far, hasn't it been? I was meeting with a pastor this week, and he's like, I've been listening to your messages. And that's always scary when another pastor says that. And he goes, are you an expository preacher? Are you an exegetical preacher? Like, what kind of preacher are you? And I looked at him baffled. I go, I really haven't thought about that. I don't know. We just go through books of the Bible. And we're just going to kind of look through them, and we're going to dig through them, and we're going to see what God has revealed through them. And I could preach the same passage week after week, and I'm sure something else would pop up. And so today I want to encourage you to open up these Bibles around you. They're in the chairs in front of you. If you don't know someone who has a Bible, or if you yourself don't have a Bible, this is our gift to you. It's yours to keep. It's yours to give away. Give it as an Easter present. Whatever it is, just pass these out. These are truly a gift to be able to have. And I want to encourage you to open to Genesis chapter 30. And the reason I opened with not knowing what kind of preacher is because like a day like today, we have a lot of text to get through. In fact, it's Genesis 30:25 all the way to Genesis 31:55. So there's no way we're going through every verse, every sentence, unless you want to be here until 2 o'clock. But there's a theme that I see in this text, in this passage, in this whole grouping. And it's a theme that begins to address this question. Have you ever felt stuck and didn't know if it was time to stay or time to go? Have you ever felt like you were in this place and you didn't know what to do next? Because those are two very different decisions to make. And it can feel as if making the wrong one can completely cost you. Now, in our American society, we live in a world that is always moving. Michigan's a little bit different, I feel like, because a lot of people love their family in Michigan and tend to stay here. I remember growing up, and I had no family in Michigan. And so everyone would go with their family to holidays and cottages or whatever, and they'd say, where are you going? I'm like, out of state? I mean, I don't stay here, but a lot of people in Michigan stay. But in the American culture as a whole, we are always moving. We're moving for our jobs, we move for opportunities, we move for comfort, we move from relationships. We always are chasing the next thing. In fact, I was looking at my high school friends who I graduated with, and the best man from our wedding lives in Australia. I have friends in California, all over the country, the world, where they now live because we chase whatever is an opportunity next. In fact, in our culture, in our world, with our technologies, we can be anywhere in the matter of a few hours, but yet we can feel completely stuck in life. And that's where it gets complicated. There's other times, though, where we stay too long. We sit in environments that are draining us, relationships that are shaping us, not necessarily for the better, and patterns that are trapping us. And deep down, we're asking these questions, God, is it time to go, or do I need to stay? And that's exactly where we find Jacob. For 20 years, Jacob has been in the same place, his father-in-law's house. Now, guys, take that in for a second. He's been in his father-in-law's house for 20 years. Most guys won't even call their father-in-law to help with a plumbing issue. But they've been working, building, enduring, being deceived and manipulated, trying to make it all work. And now he finally gets to the place where he asks the question, is it time for me to go? And so that's where we begin in Genesis 30, verse 25. It says this, soon after Rachel had given birth to Joseph. Now, there's a comma there, but I'm going to pause. What's the background information? 10 kids were born before Rachel had a child. Remember this? All of a sudden, she's sitting there and she's waiting and she's waiting and she's waiting and she's watching and she's getting frustrated because she sees what's happening around her. And finally, after 10 kids have been born in the household, not of her, she gives birth to Joseph. And so, Jacob said to Laban, "Please release me so I can go home to my own country." After the birth of Joseph, a shift happened in Jacob. He worked 7 years for Rachel, only to be manipulated into another 7 years, because remember, Laban swapped Leah and Rachel. Then he waited for kids to be born, for finally Rachel to have a kid of her own, and he endured through all of this for 20 years. But now the endurance had seemed long enough, and he began to feel discontent. There was a season, and it was coming to an end. There's no external circumstances. You don't see a flood. You don't see a famine. You don't see any sort of circumstance like that. There's no crisis. There's no collapse. There's simply a sense in Jacob that it's time. I've been told and come to understand this time and time again as holy discontent. It's where something is stirred up inside of you, where you just know God is up to something, but you're not sure what quite yet it is. Suddenly, God is moving, and we don't know why. And the timing may even seem really odd. There was a pastor that I met recently. In fact, my wife was the first one to meet the family, and when she asked them what brought him here, the little daughter said, "Well, God." And so I then got to know the pastor more, got to know his story, and they moved from North Carolina, and I said, "What moved you here?" And he said, "Well, God." He's like, no circumstances lined up. We just took a home equity loan on our house. We just remodeled it to do exactly what we needed, to add the bedroom that we thought we needed to add. We had everything fit in place. We had our next steps as I was graduating my seminary degree. We had a church we were going to plant, but God moved us. None of the details from an earthly perspective made any sort of sense. But there came a time when God was doing something. He was moving, and He was preparing him. This holy discontent isn't often during a time when things are horrible, but more often it comes when things are going well. There comes a moment in our life when faith isn't about staying anymore. It's about stepping into what God has next. Jacob sees now is a good time. So what does he do? He asks for a release. It says, Jacob said to Laban, "Please," what? "Release me so I can go home." Jacob doesn't say, "Adjust my situation." He doesn't say, "Make things easier." He doesn't say, "God, fix Laban because he's messed up." He simply asks for a release from the situation that he's in. Sometimes the hardest step of faith is not trusting God to bless where you are. It's trusting God enough to leave what's been working. Let me say that again. Sometimes the hardest step in faith is not trusting God to bless where you are. It's trusting God enough to leave what's been working. It's clear that God has been blessing Jacob. Things are actually working. Messed up, don't get it wrong, right? Things are messy, crazy, but that's just life. That's family. We'll all get together for Easter, we'll celebrate, and I guarantee there will be some sort of family drama at some point. But it's clear that God is blessing Jacob amidst all this mess. Look at verses 27 and 28 with me. "Please listen to me," Laban replied. "I have become wealthy, for the Lord has blessed me," what? "Because of you." Laban recognizes that Jacob being in his household, that The Lord, the God that Jacob follows, has actually been a blessing to him. And he says, look, you have blessed me. Tell me how much I owe you, and whatever it is, I'll pay you. This sounds like a very satisfied boss, doesn't it? Like, I am just so happy with what you've done. You tell me, and I will give you whatever. In other words, he's saying, having you around has been amazing. God has blessed you abundantly. In so doing, I've been blessed. Have you maybe had this moment in your life? Your work is finally recognized. Your value is affirmed. Things are finally starting to seem to go your way. And then right then, you feel like God is saying, don't settle there. Don't settle anymore. It seems like everything's going the way you had planned. Because instead of trusting God to provide, though, for what's next, something changes. Because just because something is blessed doesn't mean you're supposed to stay. Jacob knows it's time to go. Laban knows Jacob's value. But everything is lining up, isn't it? Well, instead of trusting God to provide for what's next, Jacob starts trying to secure it himself. And this is where things become a little messy. Because what we see in verses 32 to 43 is that we can often make a mess for ourselves. God's been stirring something up. He feels this discontent. He's asked Laban to have the release, but then sometimes we then take the steering wheel. God's been lining them up for us, but now it's time for us to do our own thing. At first, it doesn't seem like Jacob is asking much, but Jacob's request to Laban is rather bold. Jump with me through the text to verse 29. Jacob says, you know how hard I've worked for you and how your flocks and herds have grown under my care. And so he starts to explain. And so verse 31, Laban asks him, what wages do you want? In other words, what do you want? And remember, he said what? I'd give you anything. So Jacob replied, don't give me anything, but do this one thing, and I'll continue to tend and watch over your flocks. Let me inspect your flocks today, and remove all the sheep and goats that are speckled or spotted, along with all the black sheep. Give these to me as my wages. Now, in our American context, we have a saying, don't be the black sheep of the family. Right? And we almost have been ingrained, especially when we think of Jesus as the spotless lamb, to think that speckled, striped, spotted, and black are bad, and white is good. But his request in their culture and in their time is the exact opposite of that. Black, speckled, spotted, and striped are actually the stronger, better sheep, the more favorable ones, the ones they actually would desire. So his request to Laban is not some small request like, give me a part of it. No, he's like saying, give me your very best. I want the best sheep that you have in your flock. This makes Jacob's proposal rather shrewd. By requesting more valuable animals as his wages, he positions himself to accumulate wealth while appearing to accept less desirable compensation. In other words, putting it this way, he's setting himself up so he can protect his future. He's trying to take control of things, so he has everything in line. Have you ever been there? God's calling you to move, and you're like, yeah, but God, my 401k is not in the right place. My savings account isn't in the right place. My bank, whatever it is, it's just not lining up. God, it doesn't make sense yet. And so I'll do that when the market gives me a nice 15% return for a few years, and then I'll move. I met with another pastor this week who he was saying he was living comfortably. He was having things going well. He had a great job. He was making good money, living with his neighbor, being a horse farm. Like to him, this was living the high life, right? And he said, God called me into ministry. And it was like everything flipped. My daughter was 1 year old at the time, and she had 20-some allergies. Like nothing seemed like the right moment. But God said go. We often try to do it in the opposite, where we've got to line it all up. We've got to make it all work. But when we don't trust God with what's next, we start trying to control what happens now. When we don't actually trust God with what's next, we start trying to control what happens now. So dig in with me as we get to the messiness that is about to unfold. Verse 34, "All right," Laban replied, "it will be as you say." If I'm Jacob, I'm feeling pretty good. He said he would give it to me. He's given it to me. All right, he says he will. But that very day, Laban went out and removed the male goats that were streaked and spotted, and all the female goats that were speckled and spotted or had white patches, and all the black sheep. He placed them in the care of his own sons, who took them a 3 days' journey from where Jacob was. Meanwhile, Jacob stayed and cared for the rest of Laban's flock. All of a sudden, what happens? Laban agrees, but then does something completely different. He deceives. And he takes all of those flocks and he takes them and he says, you know what, we're going to put them a good 3 days' journey away. And since Laban did what he did, what does Jacob do? What you and I would do. It's time for us to make our counter move. And so because Laban did that, I'm going to get him back with this. And so verses 41 and following says, whenever the stronger females were ready to mate, Jacob would place peeled branches in the watering troughs in front of them. And then they would mate in front of the branches, but he didn't do this with the weaker ones. So the weaker lambs belonged to Laban, and the stronger ones were Jacob's. As a result, Jacob became very wealthy with large flocks of sheep, goats, female, male, and female servants, and many camels and donkeys. Just throw in the camels and donkeys while we're at it. But he finds a plan. And he takes the bark and he says, if I can put this in the water and I can cause them to get together at this time with this thing, and I'm going to be able to create my own spotted and speckled flock. What started in the very beginning as a simple step of faith has now turned into manipulation, tension, and mistrust. And this is what happens when we mix God's direction with our control. God can call us places. He can be stirring us up to do something, but then we can begin to try to control the situation. A simple ask for release has turned into this passive-aggressive competition between a father-in-law and his son-in-law. And if I can share any wisdom I've learned in my short time here on this earth, I found the more I try to control, the more of a mess I make of things. That's just me being honest. I struggle, especially with people close to me, with a 2-letter word. And they would tell you that 2-letter word. They know I struggle with it. And the word is no. And the reason I struggle with no, even though the Bible says let your yes be yes and your no be no, is because I love the maybe. Because the maybe feels like it will never disappoint someone. Because maybe says, I don't know yet. And I don't want to really be yes or no. I don't want to be fully in. I just want to be a maybe. But maybe gets interpreted 2 different ways. Someone takes maybe as leaning towards the yes, and someone takes maybe as leaning towards the no. And my desire to create peace often only creates what? Chaos. Because I didn't stand firmly in one side of a conviction or another. Jacob and Laban are trying to come up with what they think is best. And in so doing, they are making a messier mess than there was before. In fact, resentment begins to build and the interpretation of what's happening changes. Have you ever been in a family situation and it just seems like it's gotten wild from reality? Okay, family might be too close to home. What about friends? Like there's a situation where things happen, and all of a sudden what was a small deal begins to become way bigger. Look at chapter 31, verse 1. Jacob soon learned that Laban's sons were grumbling about him. Good gossip in the Bible right here. Jacob has robbed our father of everything, they said. Has he robbed him of everything? No, he actually played the game fairly, to be honest. But perception is 99% of reality, is it not? And so in their world, he's robbing their father of everything. He has gained all his wealth at our father's expense. Is it true that he robbed him? Not really. Yet it doesn't matter if it's true or not, because the damage has been caused. Look at the next verse, verse 2. And Jacob began to notice a change in Laban's attitude toward him. All of a sudden, there's a shift in the waters. The brothers are talking. The family's feeling this discontent. He's all of a sudden, he thought he took all the speckled and spotted sheep and they were fine, but all of a sudden now, Jacob's building a flock of his own. And there's this family tension that's just kind of feeling like it's just building and building and building up. Yet here is what is so key about this situation. I don't know if you've been in this situation. I know I have. And if I have, likely you have at some point. But in this situation, everything went from this small little ask to be released, and it might not be tiny small, but there was this ask to be released, to now there is family drama. And the question you keep asking yourself over and over again is, how do I get out of it? I felt God was leading. I felt God was calling. I took the reins way too soon, and I created a whole mess. And then that's where we just want to get down and frustrated with ourselves and mad at ourselves. But here's the point. God is also in this mess. It's not just about Jacob and Laban. But there's a third factor. And in our mess, in our drama, God is in that mess too. So the question becomes, what mess are we in? Likely it's not over sheep and goats and donkeys and all that. But there's some sort of disorder going on. Something we've dug ourselves into. And God is not waiting on the outside of that mess. I think sometimes we think God's like so far off. No, God is like, I am right there in it. And while Jacob schemed and plotted, something came to light in a conversation with his wives. And that was this. Jacob realized it was God who was growing the flock all along. It wasn't about the bark and the water. It wasn't about how he did things in his own strength. It was the fact that God did what only God could do. And he grew the flock for him because he wanted him to have that. Look at verse 9. If you jump down, he has these conversations with his wives. And then verse 9 says, in this way, God has taken your father's animals and given them to me. He gives all the credit to God. He says, look, I'll lay it out for you. And you can read those verses. He's like, look, this is what happened. But it was not me who did it. It was who? God. He recognized that amidst this mess, God was in it. And God had a plan. And God actually strengthened the flock. Jacob thought it was strategy. Laban thought it was his loss, but it was actually God's provision the entire time. Verse 10 really brings to light this in following. One time during the mating season, I had a dream, and I saw that the male goats mating with the females were streaked, speckled, and spotted. Then in my dream, the angel of God said to me, Jacob, and I replied, yes, here I am. The angel said, "Look up, and you will see that only the streaked, speckled, and spotted males are mating with the females of your flock. For I have seen how Laban has treated you." Did you catch that? I have seen what Laban has done to you. I have seen the pain that you have gone through. And this is something that goes throughout the Bible. I have seen the hardship that you have faced. And God is saying to us, I've seen it. I've been in it with you. I've seen what you're going through. And so, he says, "I am the God who appeared to you at Bethel, the place where you anointed the pillar of stone and made your vow to me. Now get ready and leave this country and return to the land of your birth." Without the context of the dream, it doesn't make sense. But with the context of the dream, it all begins to come together. We know that God is bigger than our own control. I love the Psalms because the Psalms just reveal so much of who God is. In Psalm 50, verses 10 to 11 says, "For all the animals of the forest are mine, and I own the cattle on 1,000 hills. I know every bird on the mountains, and all the animals of the field are mine." Jesus said, if God cares so much about the sparrows, how much does he care about you? God is the one who ultimately has control over all things in this world. You may have gotten yourself into a mess. You may have created confusion when it seemed like there was clarity. You had a holy discontent, but you made plans of your own. Now things seem to be getting out of hand, but know this, God is still faithful to lead you forward. So, back to our question. When do I know if God is telling me to go? There comes a moment when what you've been sensing, what you've been wrestling with, and what you've been trying to figure out, God finally makes it clear. God doesn't leave Jacob guessing, but there comes a time when God makes it clear and he says, "Go." And so our texts, to me, have shown really three ways in which we know, or it confirms, that God is telling me to go. The first is this: Laban's attitude change. We talked about this. Laban has a change of attitude. There comes a time when the waters begin to shift. Things begin to move around us. It's a warning sign, but it's not the sign. I think that's when we all of a sudden jump to, because we're like, the water shifted, things are getting a little crazy, maybe it's time to go. Not yet, not yet. It's just a sign. It's like the end times. We know that there will be wars and rumors of wars and earthquakes and famines, but that's just the beginning, the birth pains of it. So number one is Laban's attitude changes. Number two is this: God says to go. God says it. Verse 3, the Lord said to Jacob, "Return to your father and grandfather and your relatives there, and I will bless you." So not only did there start to be some tremblings, but then God spoke. And God said to go. Can we get them up there? I think we have 3 of them. We're on 2. And so if God says to go, what do we do then? There was a time in my life, because we always wonder, well, how do you hear from God? Have you ever asked that question? And the good pastor says, well, read your Bible and you will hear from God. And you're like, I'm reading the Bible, dude, and I'm just not hearing from God. Like, come on, I need it like black and white, easy, laid out for me. I've been there. So there was a time where I'm just praying about something. I'm in ministry at a different location, and I'm praying, Lord, I just don't know. I'm very frustrated. Things are not the way I thought they should be. I need to know what you want me to do. Should I stay or should I go? And there was a friend that I knew who was like, hey, we have this job opportunity that we'd love for you to pursue. And so I'm laying it out there and I'm saying, Lord, what do I do with this? I don't know what to do, but I put it all before you. Just make it clear to me. And this was one of those moments in my life where I had like that deep prayer that I've never prayed usually up until that point. Like it was like that praying with agony, like the feeling of, Lord, just make it clear. And the next morning, I walk into the church sanctuary, And we always would have prayer intercessors walking around before our gatherings. And I walked in, and this one like shot to me like a missile, like boom, like right to me. And she's like, I got to tell you something. I'm like, what? She's like, I don't know why I got to tell you this, but the Lord wants me to tell you, stay right where you are. There are times where God will use other people to speak into your life. And you have to make sure that it aligns with the Word of God, and you have to make sure it aligns with the ways of God, but you also got to listen. Because I thank that woman. Her name was Vicky. I'll never forget her because I didn't meet Jessica at the time. So that means I met my wife because I stayed. I wouldn't have been at fellowship if I left. Like all these things in my life would have never lined up had I just left. But I listened to the faithful woman of prayer who said to me, stay. Now, it wasn't without me praying the night before either. Now, you're going to go home and you're going to be like, all right, Lord, I put it out there. Pastor Robert said, so I'm going to pray, and I'm waiting for someone at the grocery store or whatever tomorrow to tell me the answer. Sometimes we got to have more patience, all right? That was like the one time I got instantaneous answer, all right? But there was another time when Jessica and I were leaving that church, and we were praying, Lord, make your way clear. And I'll never forget that moment because Fellowship Chapel made 0 sense for us to go to. 0. But we both knew the Lord was calling us here. And it was hard when we had other churches that were like, yeah, we're turning you down for this church that, frankly, we don't even know if there's a shot there. But we took a step of faith because God told us that's what it is. So, you'll have times where God does speak. And then the third thing is there will be agreement. Rachel and Leah responded in verse 14, that's fine with us. We won't inherit any of our father's wealth anyways. I say this because if the people in your life aren't in agreement with the move, it's probably not the right move. There was one time, I don't know if I should share this, so Jessica's going to be, oh no. There was one time we had one fight over money in our life. And it was because the Lions were really bad, okay? Like really bad. Really bad, like 0-10-1 bad. And I called the season ticket office and I said, what are season tickets? Because she took me to that game when they won their first game under Dan Campbell. It was a good birthday present, the one she'll always forget, or not forget, she'll regret. So they're now 1-10-1, and I call and I say, what were the costs of season tickets? And he told me, and I said, we paid more for an 0-10-1 team than for those. Sign me up for season tickets. And so then I went to Jessica, and she said, why do you seem so nervous? I said, well, I may have made a deposit without asking on Lion season tickets. She said, you're a pastor. You preach every single Sunday. The games are on Sunday. Yes. That's a lot of money to commit. Yes. And all of a sudden I said, but here's my pros and cons list. And she looked and she said, there's all pros and 0 cons. What's going on with this? That probably was not a wise decision in the Went household. You should find times when there is agreement between the two, and you don't have to force the agreement there. I have found that God is not a God of disorder. He's a God of peace. And we don't need to force God's order. Jacob received the blessing for those close to him, and he wasn't acting alone. You don't need to force your spouse into God's will. He will align things and work on their heart without your intervention. But here's the last thing. Going actually means letting go. So say the things actually align, and you see the shaking in the water, and you sense God saying to go, and there's alignment within your household, and you know, all right, God, you've made it clear. It's time for us to go, even if it doesn't make sense. Going actually means letting go, though. Genesis 31:17 says, "So Jacob put his wives and his children on the camels, and they drove all his livestock in front of him. He packed all the belongings he acquired in Paddan Aram, and he set out for the land of Canaan where his father Isaac lived. At that time they left Laban, was some distance away shearing the sheep." Catch this line, though. Rachel stole her father's household idols, not items, big difference, idols, and took them with her. She was clinging to something of the past, wasn't she? She didn't fully let it go. Rachel wasn't quite all in. She was part of the way there. The question becomes, what idols do we keep holding on to when the Lord told us to trust? We bring things with us, and often it means headaches are sure to follow. And suddenly our text shows us that Laban is right behind him. It says 3 days later, Laban was in hot pursuit. And in 7 days he caught him. Let me share this about when we move on and kind of try to bring it home. Running from something is never the answer. Running from something is never the answer. Jacob was running from Laban. He didn't tell him. He left in the cover of night. Rachel was running with resentment. She took the family idols with her as if to say, I'm going to show him. But to move freely to the next place, we must address the headaches from our last situation. Have you left something without resolving the past and wondered why it keeps following you? It's because you didn't resolve the things of the past. You can't run. It will find you. But here's my hope for us all. No matter what situation we found us in, God has a rescue plan. And He loves His children. And He looks after His children. Genesis 31:24 says, "But the previous night God had appeared to Laban at Aramean in a dream and told him, I'm warning you, leave Jacob alone." In other words, God appears in this pursuit, in this time when He's going to say, and the Bible even tells us, the passage tells us that Laban's like, I could utterly destroy you, Jacob. But the Lord said not to. It was like the Lord came to Laban and said, I want this to stop. I'll never forget I was a kid, and as a kid we played a lot of street hockey in our street. Maybe some of you played street hockey. Not a good skater, not good at hockey. I'm just being honest. I'm not any of that. But I loved playing street hockey with the guys. And so we played street hockey. And I'll never forget we'd get into fights, like we were really fighting. Well, one time I was getting my butt beat, like bad. And my dad came out, and it's probably not a moment that I should have much pride over because it wasn't a manly moment. But he came out and he said, leave my son alone. And they all scattered. Now, some of you are like, dude, what a wimp. But here's the point. There comes times in our life where we need God to step in and say, leave my son alone. Get off of him. And that's what God does to Laban, and that's what God does in our lives. Jacob knew the most important thing, and it's found in Genesis 31:42. In fact, the God of my father has not been on my side, the God of Abraham and the fearsome God of Isaac. You would have sent me away empty-handed. But God has seen your abuse and your hard work, and that is why He appeared to you that night and rebuked you. The story ends with the two making an agreement. There's a sense of peace, and all the sides come together. In order to truly experience freedom and to know where you're really set to go, you have to let the Lord guide your step. And so let me leave you with this psalm. It's from Psalm 119, verse 50. Maybe you've heard it. The word is a lamp to guide my feet and a light to my path. As the team comes forward, I want to leave you with this last thought. A lamp doesn't show very far into the distance, does it? It only shows one step at a time. It doesn't say, the Lord, your word is a floodlight, does it? It doesn't say, your word is a beacon that shows everything. It says, your word is a lamp. And so trusting God and taking that next step is really often only knowing the next step and not much beyond it. And so where is the Lord calling you to go? Would you have the faith and the confidence to take that step? Would you pray with me? Father, I thank you for the way that you are guiding and moving in our lives. I thank you for the way that you're steering and directing our paths. And Lord, may your word be a lamp unto our feet and a light unto our path. Lord, for those of us who are asking, where is it that you would have me go? Lord, would you make it clear? Would you give us the confidence to take that one step? In your name we pray.